Hello guys, welcome back. My name is Nathan and today I'm going to be doing my winners and losers of the 2021 NHL trade deadline. Now the trade deadline is officially over and we saw teams go buying, we saw teams go selling, some teams missed opportunities, some teams got absolutely fleeced, and everything in between. But when it comes to this year's trade deadline, who were the teams that succeeded the most and which teams were the ones that failed the most this year? Watch till the end for all of my rankings and all my picks and hit that subscribe button if you're new. 65% of the people that are watching the videos are not subscribed, so every bit helps on the road now to 34K. Now we can officially get on to the number one winner of the 2021 NHL trade deadline, the team that I think won the trade deadline. Now there's quite a few teams that I think were great winners that aren't quite number one, but we'll feature later on in the video. But coming in at number one, I have the Columbus Blue Jackets. Now I did not expect the Columbus Blue Jackets to do great in this trade deadline, but really given the circumstances that Janmark was in, he did pretty decently, to be honest. Now we trade away Nick Foligno, trade away Nick Savard, trade away Riley Nash, but he got 2 first-round picks, got a 4th round pick, got a 7th round pick for Riley Nash, as well as on top of the picks he got for the David Savard deal too. I think overall he did very, very decently. And when you look at Columbus, that's a team that I think is in a dire need of at least a retool, but I think a fully fledged rebuild is what they should be going towards. This is a step in that direction, and I think that's what Columbus should do, especially with these great drafts in 2022 and 2023 coming up. I think Columbus right now is doing exactly what they should be doing, trying to just have a full reset and trying to do the best with what they got. And they got 3 first-round picks right now. Not too bad for a team to start out the rebuild. But now we have to go to the biggest loser of the 2021 NHL trade deadline and a little bit of an opposite of the Columbus Blue Jackets. We're now going to go to a team that I think had the most missed opportunity. Now, I don't think there's a big gap between the first loser and the number 5 loser, for instance. But coming in at the biggest loser of the 2021 trade deadline, I have the Winnipeg Jets. I've talked about it a bunch on the streams recently for the trade deadline. The Winnipeg Jets simply did not do enough. And if it weren't for Jordie Benn, they wouldn't have done anything at this year's trade deadline, which in my opinion would have been a big mistake. Now I do like the Jordie Benn deal and I think it is a win for them, but at the same time, guys like Ekholm, guys like Savard that they've let go by, I think will definitely bite them in the butt come playoff time. Their oldest defenseman besides Jordie Benn is 29 in Derek Forbort, and I feel like they needed a really strong, almost top 4 caliber veteran defenseman that can kind of lift some of that defensive pressure off guys like Josh Morrissey, which I think has been badly needed throughout this season. That's still a decent above expectation defense, but I feel like they needed something else, some bigger push, especially with Toronto buying as much as they had at this year's deadline. I still think Winnipeg is a good team, especially offensively, but I think the missed opportunity is quite a bit disappointing. But now going on to the second winner of this year's NHL trade deadline, and we're going to go back to a Canadian team and go to the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, you could have an argument that they are the biggest winner of this year's deadline. I wouldn't quite go that far, but I do think in what they did add, they set themselves up pretty great for the playoffs. Now, you first had the Riley Nash deal, and when he comes back, I think he could be a pretty good middle of the line, bottom player for them, right in the bottom of the lineup, and he'll be pretty serviceable in that department, especially defensively. But you have the Nick Foligno signing as well, not signing, trade, where they have to give a 1st round pick and a 4th round pick, and I do think that is an overpay. But at the same time, players like Nick Foligno win playoff games. They play the exact type of style that playoffs really do demand, and I think a player like that who has leadership, has been a captain in Columbus for so long, can bring those situations and bring that experience to Toronto that I think is badly needed. And I think that's a deal that could end up winning a playoff series. That's the type of deal that I think definitely pushes teams into the better, and I think Toronto will definitely feel the results of that. And you also got the David Rittich deal, which it seems like Freddie Anderson might be out for the season, which would mean that I think this deal is actually a pretty good one for Toronto. You give him a 3rd round pick for a guy who probably will be your backup behind Jack Campbell, and it's a good safety net and a lot better of an option as a 3rd guy than, well, Michael Hutchinson. Now going on, though, to the second biggest loser of this year's trade deadline, I'm now going to go to the Buffalo Sabres. Now, I want to get this out of the way. I don't think that Buffalo was getting a 1st round pick for Taylor Hall, but that doesn't mean that they didn't lose quite a bit at this year's deadline. In the first place, to give away Taylor Hall and his talent for only a 2nd round pick in Bjork, I think is just an absolute failure in every single direction of the Buffalo Sabres departments. Sure, yes, what you would have gotten is likely that's probably the most they got, but the way the situation they were in where they only got a 2nd for Taylor Hall is just an absolute disaster for a franchise that already has quite enough disasters. I mean, getting a 3rd round pick for Brandon Montour is okay, I guess, but they also probably will have Linus Ullmark leave after this season and become a UFA, leave free agency, and they didn't even deal him. So they might have a goaltender who's been so good for them leaving after this year and being like one of the only good players they've had this season, leaving and going away from the franchise. As far as I'm concerned for the Buffalo Sabres, just a bad performance overall, and it's one of those situations where you knew it was kind of coming, and it's just a result of their bad management and bad play, just in general. But now going on to the third biggest winner at this year's deadline, I'm now going to go on to the Boston Bruins, the team that Taylor Hall got traded from the Buffalo Sabres. I think the Boston Bruins did relatively well at this year's deadline. I think they could have maybe used another extra defenseman, but besides that, I think Boston did very well. You had first off the Mike Riley deal, where they got Mike Riley for a third-round pick. Especially recently, he's been really good offensively for the Ottawa Senators, surprisingly. They developed him into a really decent middle of the line offensive D-man. And I think for Boston, especially if you put him on a pair with a guy like a Charlie McAvoy, I think that could definitely work. And only getting a third-round pick, I mean, giving up a third-round pick, I still think that's pretty fair value and is a good trade overall for Boston. And then you have the Taylor Hall deal, which again, if it all goes right and Taylor Hall is able to unlock that Edmonton and early New Jersey magic, then you get a guy, a top 6 player like that, and potentially even a first-line player for a second-round pick and Anders Bjork. That is a fantastic trade and one that Boston should definitely be proud of. Now we're going to go on to the third biggest loser of this year's trade deadline. This was a team involved in the biggest one of this year's trade deadline, and I think definitely, I wouldn't say got fleeced, but definitely got the short end of the stick. We're now going to go on to the Washington Capitals as the third biggest loser. Now, I think the Washington Capitals were already kind of a little bit of a loser before the Anthony Mantha trade. They really didn't do anything. I thought their defense needed some big-time upgrades, and yet nothing happened. And then the Anthony Mantha trade happened, and I thought there would, initially when it was talked about 2 picks being involved, I thought maybe Washington would get a pick for that. But it ended up being Anthony Mantha for Vrana, Panik, a first-rounder, and a second-rounder. Now, I think Mantha is a little bit of an upgrade in Vrana in some aspects, but let's not kid ourselves that Washington mismanaged Vrana to heck and back. He had, in his last 5 games, the most amount of minutes he played was 15 minutes, I think, and the lowest was like 11 minutes. He has been healthy scratched multiple times throughout this year, but is still putting up great production and is still super young compared to that Washington Capitals team. Now, I think they sacrificed a lot of futures, obviously. I think Mantha will still be great on Washington, but I think Detroit definitely wins that trade. And again, with Washington's kind of just lack of anything before even that trade, I think it results in them not really getting too much of an upgrade. And again, that defense needed something. We don't get anything, and the Capitals kind of just stay stuck in that department. But now going on to the fourth biggest winner of this year's deadline. My pick is going to go to the team that traded with the Washington Capitals in the Detroit Red Wings. I think the Red Wings did very well this year's deadline. They didn't really make too many big moves, and I think they definitely could have moved Bernier or Glendening. They didn't have to, though, and they make that absolutely insane deal to get Jakub Vrana. For the Detroit Red Wings, this is just a perfect deal for them. They get Vrana, who's 25, right in his prime, but is still a youthful player and will still be around when Detroit is really getting going. And you have him on a solid deal. You also have Panik, who comes in as a decent player. You get some cap there, but you get a first-round pick and a second-round pick. And albeit those picks won't be great because of the Washington Capitals picks, but at the same time, to get that type of value from Mantha, I think is stupendous. You get a guy like Vrana, who's not in a different world of Mantha. He's really similar in terms of point production and in terms of actual play, I think. And you get a first-rounder and a second-rounder on top of that. Even if Detroit made no other moves at this deadline, they would still be one of the biggest winners, and I think they should definitely be in this top 5 for sure. But now going on to the fourth biggest loser, we're now going to go to another team that kind of stood still quite a bit at this year's deadline. This is a team that I think definitely could have used some more firepower. Didn't quite get that, though, in the Colorado Avalanche. Now, they made the Patrick Nemeth move a couple days back, and they also made the Carl Soderberg move. They also ended up getting Devin Dubnyk. But I think for the Avalanche, they had a lot more opportunity to get some bigger guys. They mostly obviously go for depth and guys like Dubnyk and Nemeth, and I think Soderberg's all right, but nobody that's really gonna be above replacement, I think, for Colorado. And even guys like Devin Dubnyk, I know Johansson is bad, but Dubnyk is also not the greatest either, and I really don't see him being too great in Colorado at the same time. But Colorado had some major cap space this year. They could have gone after some major players, and to me, I think they still can potentially win the Stanley Cup, and I still think they are the favorite for that, but they could have been like the sure bet for me, and they didn't quite reach that. But now going on to the fifth biggest winner of this year's deadline. This was a team that actually I didn't really have too much expectations for, but somehow turned their players into some pretty great assets. We're not going to go to, strangely, the Calgary Flames. They haven't won much lately, but they have won the trade deadline, at least in some respects. You have the Graviteh deal, of course, where they got a third-round pick for him. And I think for a backup goalie to get a third-round pick in any situation is pretty decent trade for Calgary. And then you have the Sam Bennett deal, where you give away Sam Bennett, a guy who's been on your bottom 6 forever, and besides the playoffs hasn't played good, for a second round pick and Emil Henneman, who was a second round pick last year. And I've watched Henneman quite a bit these past couple of years. He was great in the SHL, great smarts, great overall ability, doesn't really have too many weaknesses to his game. And I think he's a guy that would be a pretty perfect middle six player for the future in Calgary. And again, you get a second round pick on top of that, which it will be Florida, so it won't be amazing. But even though, of course, they had to trade Sam Bennett, who was the fourth overall pick, of course, still, with what production he was actually getting, to get 2 second-round picks basically is a pretty big miracle, and another third-round pick. The Calgary Flames do pretty well in that aspect in trading their big UFAs. Now going on to our 5th and final loser of the 2021 NHL trade deadline. This is again the least losing team out of the losing teams I'll mention today, but I still think with what they gave up, what they got, it was quite a bit disappointing. I'm now going to go to the Montreal Canadiens as the 5th and final loser of this year's deadline. First and foremost, they put Victor Mete on waivers, and their replacement is Erik Gustafsson. Erik Gustafsson, in almost every single way, is worse than Victor Mete. You thought Victor Mete couldn't defend? Erik Gustafsson could not defend a AAA player, let alone multiple NHL players. He is good on the power play, and in some spurts he is good offensively, but he should not play for the Montreal Canadiens. And you give up Victor Mete, who I still think at 22 years old had still a lot of potential, and you pretty much waste that completely. He's now to the Ottawa Senators. Now, I do think the John Merrill deal is good, and I think that is a good deal for them, but it was a little bit far and few between, especially with the Gallagher injury. You had, obviously, Anthony Mantha on the market, and obviously Detroit's got a pretty decent haul, and I'm not sure if Montreal would have given that up, but at the same time, you could have made your team really good for the now, and I'm not really sure what Montreal's trying to do. They're in a weird position where they're trying to contend, but also rebuild at the same time. It's a really weird situation, and I feel like if they're going to go for it, this might as well be it. And you could have gotten a guy like Anthony Mantha, hypothetically, of course, but that type of upgrade would have made the Habs something different. Would have made them a different force to be reckoned with that they haven't really been since the start of this season. I think Montreal had some wasted potential, but also in terms of the players they gave up, Gustafsson is a downgrade on Victor Mete. Yes, John Merrill is good, but again, just like Winnipeg, the wasted potential, I think, hurts to see. That'll be it for today, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, and hit that notification bell if you have not already. Make sure you comment down below what do you agree and disagree with my winners and losers. Who do you think were the biggest winners and the biggest losers of the trade deadline? Make sure you share this video with your friends. Get it out there, boys, and click on a link up here for all my hockey rankings content right on the playlist. My name is Nathan. Hope you're having a fantastic day, and I'll see you in the next video or stream. Goodbye.